Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted the most? What if that betrayal was from your best friend, the person you thought you could rely on for anything? Now imagine the ultimate slap in the face. Your best friend marrying your ex, the one you thought you'd never let go of. Sounds like a nightmare, right? But what if I told you that I showed up at their wedding, but not as a guest, not as someone trying to make peace? No, I crashed that wedding with a secret that would change everything. How far would you go to make them regret what they did to you? Comment below and share your thoughts. What would you do if you were me? I never expected something like this to happen. I had always considered Sarah, my best friend, to be my closest ally. We had been through thick and thin together, from childhood memories to late-night talks about our dreams and fears. But the one person who was supposed to have my back, the person I trusted more than anyone, turned out to be the one to destroy everything. It all started innocently enough. Sarah had met Jason, my ex, at a party we had all attended together. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had moved on from Jason after our breakup, though the memories still lingered. We'd been together for 3 years before things fell apart. Sarah had always known the deep, painful details of our relationship, how we'd fought, the heartbreak, and the time I spent healing. But I didn't think she'd ever cross that line. She was supposed to be my best friend, right? I never saw the signs until it was too late. It started with little things, subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. She'd ask about Jason more frequently, mentioning that she'd run into him around town. I thought it was just coincidence, so I brushed it off. After all, Sarah was a friend who always wanted to keep in touch with everyone, even people from my past. But then one day, Sarah called me, and her voice was shaky. There was a strange tension in the air. She was speaking to me like I was a stranger. "I've been meaning to tell you something," she said, her voice barely audible. "Jason and we've been talking and, we've gotten closer. I think we're dating now." My world seemed to stop. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. She couldn't be serious. My best friend, the one who knew every detail of my broken relationship, was now dating the very person who had hurt me the most. I felt a rush of anger, hurt, and disbelief all at once. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? I wanted to scream, to let out the frustration, but I didn't. I simply told her, "I need time to process this." I didn't want to lose my cool, but I also knew that this wasn't something I could just brush aside. Days turned into weeks, and the situation grew more complicated. Sarah and Jason's relationship started to get more public. They were posting pictures together on social media, laughing, smiling, everything that I had once shared with Jason. But the worst part? They were planning their wedding, and the worst part of all? I was invited. The wedding invitation arrived in the mail one morning, as if it were just another ordinary event. I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity. Sarah had invited me, my best friend, to the wedding where she was marrying the man I had once loved. The betrayal hit me harder than ever. I couldn't sit back and let this happen. I couldn't be the person who simply wished them well and walked away. No, I wasn't going to let it go that easily. I thought of all the things I had been through, all the heartache, all the nights I spent alone wondering if I'd ever be able to move on from Jason. How could she do this to me? How could she act like everything was fine when I was dying inside? As the day of the wedding approached, I realized that I couldn't just let them have this moment. I couldn't let them walk away without facing the consequences. And that's when the idea hit me. Crashing their wedding with a secret. A secret that would change everything. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Jason smiling together, their love so out in the open, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the audacity of it. The fact that Sarah had known how deeply Jason had hurt me, yet she still chose him. She chose him over me, her best friend. The one person she knew would always be there for her. I couldn't let them get away with it, not without facing the consequences of their actions. So I started to plan. At first, the idea of showing up at their wedding felt insane. Who does that? Who crashes their best friend's wedding? But then I thought, what would I really be walking into? A room full of people who'd chosen to turn their backs on me. A room where Sarah and Jason would stand hand in hand, oblivious to the damage they'd caused. I wasn't going to let them have this moment. I wasn't going to sit back and pretend like everything was okay. They needed to know what it felt like to be betrayed. The plan started to form in my mind. I didn't just want to show up and cause a scene. I needed to make an impact. I needed to make them feel the weight of their actions. So I set my eyes on a little detail. A secret. A secret that would change everything. You see, Jason wasn't the only one who had something to hide. I knew something about him. Something that could shatter his perfect little life with Sarah. I had found it out a few months ago, before everything fell apart between us. I had discovered a dark side to Jason that Sarah didn't know about. Something he'd kept hidden, even from her. I wasn't sure how to use it at first, but now it felt like the perfect weapon. I started digging through old messages, emails, and photos. It was time to unearth the past and expose the man who had once claimed to love me. I had to admit, it felt good to be in control again. I had been so broken, so vulnerable for so long, but now I had the power to take back what was mine. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Jason walk away unscathed. As the wedding day drew closer, I began to get more daring. I called up a few old friends who still had ties to the couple, pretending like I was still the old me, the one who was happy for them. I learned more about the wedding details, the venue, the guests, the seating arrangements. I made sure I knew everything. I needed to be prepared. I needed to make sure that when the time came, I'd be able to execute my plan flawlessly. The hardest part was keeping my emotions in check. I had to stay calm, collected, and focused. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how much anger I felt inside, I couldn't let that show. If I did, everything would fall apart. I had to be strategic. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. And then the day finally came. I had my outfit ready, one that would blend in with the crowd but still make a statement. I had a few more phone calls to make, confirming everything was set. But deep down, I knew this was it. The moment of truth. I was about to crash their wedding, not as a guest, not as someone trying to make peace, but as someone who was about to reveal the truth. My secret, the one that had been hidden away for so long, was finally going to see the light of day. As I stood outside the wedding venue, my heart raced. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about showing them that I wasn't weak. I wasn't the person they could walk all over. I had been quiet for far too long. But today, everything was going to change. The nerves were eating me alive. Standing outside the grand venue, I could hear the soft hum of chatter from inside, the rustling of dresses, the clinking of glasses. It was as if the world had gone on without me, without a second thought to how my entire life had been shattered. Sarah and Jason had already begun their new life together, and here I was, standing on the outside, preparing to disrupt their perfect little world. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't let that stop me. This was my moment. I had worked too hard for it, and I wasn't going to back down now. I glanced down at the small envelope tucked into my hand, the secret I was about to expose. I had debated for days whether or not to reveal this, but I knew this was the only way to make them feel the weight of their betrayal. The secret could destroy everything Jason had built with Sarah. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about showing them what it felt like to be blindsided. I walked through the door of the venue pretending to be just another guest. I had managed to get myself invited using a fake name and a little charm. No one questioned me as I entered, and for a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. As I moved through the room, I could see Sarah in her wedding dress, radiant and glowing with happiness. Jason stood beside her, looking proud, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but I could tell they were already deep in their perfect little world. They looked at each other with such love, as if nothing else mattered. And that made what I was about to do even more satisfying. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me as I took my seat, but I didn't care. I had a job to do, and nothing else mattered. Then, the unthinkable happened. As I was watching Sarah and Jason exchange glances, I noticed something that made my heart stop. Jason was looking at me, but not in the way I expected. His eyes were narrowed, and his face had gone pale. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but no. There was something strange about the way he was staring at me. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the plan I had set in motion. I was here for one reason and one reason only, to make them realize the pain they had caused me. But then I saw Sarah catch Jason's eye, and her face froze. Something was off. A sense of dread washed over me as the realization hit. They knew. Before I could process what was happening, Sarah turned to Jason, her voice shaky. "You didn't tell me she would be here," she whispered, her eyes darting between me and Jason. Jason's face turned a shade of red that made me almost smile. He was sweating now, his hands fidgeting. He clearly wasn't as calm as he had appeared earlier. And then the unthinkable happened. Jason stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Excuse me, everyone," Jason announced, his voice a little too shaky. "I think we need to talk." The room went silent, the energy shifting from joy to confusion. Guests began whispering among themselves. Sarah looked confused, then worried, and finally she turned to me with wide eyes. "Why are you here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear. There was no longer any pretense, no longer any smiling. The mask had fallen, and I could see the cracks in her perfect world. I could feel the weight of the secret in my pocket, the power in my hands. It was time. But instead of just handing over the secret, I stood up, my voice cold and clear. "Do you want to know why I'm here? Because I was invited to your wedding, but it wasn't by you. It was by someone who knew what I was going to do to you today. It wasn't a wedding you were having, it was a setup." I watched as Sarah's face paled, her hand trembling as she reached for Jason. He looked at her, then at me, and back again. His expression shifted from confusion to something darker. The air grew thick, charged with tension. I had them right where I wanted them. But what happened next was the last thing I expected. Just before I could continue, Jason stepped forward, his face twisted with a mix of guilt and anger. He pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Sarah. "I wanted to tell you," he said quietly, looking at the paper in her hand, "before everything came out." Sarah unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning it quickly. Then she looked up at me, her face a mirror of shock and betrayal. "You already knew, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The room grew eerily silent. I could see Sarah's hands trembling as she held the paper, her eyes flicking back and forth between Jason and me. She didn't speak for a moment, and in that silence, I felt a rush of power. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about giving them a taste of their own medicine. The silence stretched on, thick with tension, and I could feel the eyes of the entire room on us. Every guest was holding their breath, waiting for the truth to come out. Jason, who had been standing near me just moments ago, now seemed like he was drowning in his own guilt. His face was pale, his expression frozen in horror. The air was heavy with the realization that everything was about to change. Sarah slowly lowered the paper, her eyes now filled with confusion and hurt. She looked at Jason, then back at me, almost as if she couldn't understand what was happening. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky, but there was a coldness to it that I had never heard before. Jason shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at her. His voice was strained, almost cracking as he said, It's something I should have told you a long time ago. I never wanted it to come out like this. But she knew." For a moment, I thought Sarah might collapse. She was already on the edge, her body language tight, her breathing shallow. I had seen that look in her eyes before. The look of someone realizing they had been completely blindsided, taken advantage of. "Tell me what's going on, Jason," she demanded, her voice firm but filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Was it disbelief? Or was it anger? I could feel the tension building inside me, but I refused to let it show. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to back down now. "You want to know what's going on, Sarah?" I asked, stepping closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "The truth is, Jason has been hiding something from you. Something that involves me, and it's something you need to know before you make a huge mistake." Jason winced, his gaze dropping to the floor. He knew what was coming next, and I could tell that this wasn't how he had planned for things to unfold. He had expected the wedding to go off without a hitch, to walk away with Sarah by his side and leave me in the past. But that was never going to happen. Not today. "You see, Sarah," I continued, my voice low but steady, "Jason didn't just break my heart when he walked away from me. He did something far worse. Something that I've been sitting on for far too long." Jason's face twisted with guilt, his hand running through his hair as he muttered something under his breath. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he said, almost as if he was trying to justify what he had done. "But you did mean for it to happen," I shot back, my voice sharp. "And you lied. You lied to her, to me, and to everyone else. But I'm not going to let you get away with it." Sarah was still holding the paper, her eyes glued to it as if it held the key to understanding everything that had gone wrong. I could see the realization dawning on her, but she was too afraid to speak, too afraid to confront the truth. I couldn't let her stay in the dark any longer. "Jason," I said, my voice now cold and deliberate, "you remember that night we spent together, right? The night we talked about our future, about everything we had planned. You thought it was just another night, didn't you? But that's the night you made a huge mistake." Jason's face went completely pale, his entire body stiffening as he realized where I was going with this. He looked around the room, his eyes filled with panic, but I could see that he knew he was trapped. "Sarah," I said, turning my attention back to her, "you know about the night we were together, don't you? The night Jason and well, let's just say it wasn't just a goodbye. It was a secret, one that Jason never wanted you to find out about. But the truth always comes out." Sarah's eyes flickered with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice now. The cracks were starting to show. "Jason and we were together again after the breakup," I said, my words hitting like a slap. "And guess what? He never told you, did he? He never told you that while he was falling in love with you, he was still holding on to something with me. He didn't tell you that he was keeping a secret. A big one." The room was dead silent. No one dared to move or speak. The guests, the people who had come to celebrate the beginning of Jason and Sarah's life together, were now caught in the middle of a bombshell that neither of them had seen coming. And I could feel the weight of the moment settling over them. But before Sarah could process what I had said, Jason spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for you to find out this way, Sarah," he said, his voice shaking. I swear, I was going to tell you. But I knew it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The silence in the room was deafening. Jason's attempt to explain himself only seemed to make things worse, and Sarah's face, once glowing with joy, had now been drained of all color. The wedding, which had started as the happiest day of their lives, was spiraling into chaos. I could almost feel the tension in the air as the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to do or say. Sarah's eyes were wide with disbelief. She clutched the paper in her hands as if it could somehow shield her from the truth. I could see the pain in her eyes, the realization that everything she had believed in was a lie. She had trusted Jason, believed in their future together, and now it was all crashing down around her. She turned slowly toward Jason, her voice trembling. "How could you?" she whispered. "How could you do this to me? To us?" The hurt in her voice was palpable, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the way she had taken Jason from me, and any sympathy I had quickly faded. Jason stood frozen, unable to meet her gaze. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had been caught in his own web of lies, struggling to find a way to untangle himself from the mess he had created. "I never meant for it to happen like this," he said, his voice barely audible. "I was going to tell you, Sarah, I swear. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," I interrupted, my voice firm and unwavering. "You hurt both of us. You lied to her and you lied to me. And now you're going to have to face the consequences." Jason's eyes snapped toward me, his anger flaring. "You've done enough, okay?" he snapped. "You've made your point. Now, can we please just move on? It's done." But Sarah wasn't ready to move on. She was shaking now, her hands trembling as she stared at Jason, then back at me. "Is this really true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Were you really with her? After we started dating? After I trusted you?" Jason's face twisted in agony, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I had never expected. Guilt. True, undeniable guilt. But it wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. He had already crossed a line, and nothing he said now would change what had happened. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Sarah," he said again, his voice faltering. "It just happened." "No, Jason," Sarah suddenly exploded, her voice rising with rage. "It didn't just happen. You made a choice. You chose to hurt me, and now I'm paying for it." The room was electric with tension. Everyone was watching, waiting for Sarah to make the next move. But Sarah wasn't looking at anyone else. Her gaze was fixed solely on Jason, the man who had broken her heart and crushed her trust. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me the truth before all of this? Before I let you in? Before I made you part of my life?" Jason lowered his head, unable to answer. He had no excuse, no justification that could fix the damage he had done. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. But then something unexpected happened. "I'm done," Sarah said, her voice suddenly cold and composed. She turned on her heel and started walking toward the exit. Everyone in the room was watching her, stunned by her sudden composure. But I wasn't surprised. In that moment, Sarah was no longer the woman who had been blinded by love. She had transformed into someone who saw the truth for what it was, someone who was no longer willing to be manipulated. Jason reached out to her, his voice desperate. "Sarah, wait. Please, just let me explain. I love you. I always have." Sarah paused, but didn't turn around. "You love me," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "You don't love me, Jason. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me. You wouldn't have lied to me, to both of us." With that, she walked out, leaving Jason standing there, speechless. The guests, who had been eagerly awaiting the wedding vows, now stood in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. But I didn't feel pity for Jason. No, I felt something else, a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't over yet, but I could already feel the shift. The scales had tipped, and everything he thought was secure was now in ruins. And as I watched Sarah walk away, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the power that I had lost. It was about showing them both that I wasn't someone to be overlooked. The truth had come out, but the consequences were only just beginning. The door slammed shut behind Sarah as she walked out of the venue, leaving a trail of silence in her wake. Jason stood there, frozen, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had been caught, exposed, and now there was no escaping the consequences of his betrayal. The guests whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of the scene that had just unfolded. But for me, everything felt right. Finally, I wasn't the one who had been left in the shadows. Jason was trying to salvage what was left of his dignity, but it was clear he was losing control. His eyes were wild, searching the room as if he could will everything back to how it was before. But it was too late. Nothing could undo the damage he had done. Not to Sarah, not to me, and not to himself. I watched him from the corner of my eye, my hands still trembling with a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. The plan had worked, and Sarah had seen the truth. I could feel the weight of my own secret lifting off my shoulders. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jason finally turned his attention back to the crowd, his face a mask of desperation. "Look, this isn't what it seems," he began, his voice shaking as he addressed the room. "This is all a misunderstanding. Sarah and we can fix this." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly under my breath. He didn't even have the decency to admit his wrongdoings. Instead, he was trying to spin the story, paint himself as the victim. It was typical Jason, always the manipulator, always looking for a way out. But the truth was out, and no amount of excuses could cover up what had happened. He had betrayed me, and he had betrayed Sarah. It was a double-edged sword, and now he was going to feel the full force of both sides. I watched as he stumbled toward the exit, his eyes scanning the room in a panic, but no one followed him. Everyone was too stunned by the chaos that had just unfolded. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a battlefield, and Jason was the one left standing alone. I could hear his voice, now louder and more frantic, as he reached the door. "Please, just let me explain. This isn't over yet." But no one was listening anymore. He was just another person trying to claw his way back to a life he had destroyed. As I stepped forward, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about making him realize the consequences of his actions. It was about showing him that I wouldn't let him get away with what he had done to me and to Sarah. But the real victory was still to come. I knew Jason wouldn't leave things like this. He was too proud, too arrogant. He would come crawling back, trying to fix what he had broken. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. No, I had more planned for him than just exposing his secrets. This was just the beginning. I glanced at the room, noting the tension in the air. The guests had stopped whispering, but they were still processing what had just happened. Some looked at me with curiosity, while others seemed uncomfortable, unsure of whether to sympathize with me or Sarah. It didn't matter. I didn't need anyone's sympathy. I had everything under control now. But as the minutes passed and the dust began to settle, I realized something. The pain wasn't gone. The anger I had been holding onto for so long still burned inside me. The betrayal, the lies, everything Jason and Sarah had put me through. It wasn't just a story I was telling anymore. It was my reality, my pain, and I couldn't move forward without confronting that. I turned and walked toward the exit, my mind set on the next step of my plan. Jason might have lost this battle, but the war wasn't over. There was still more to be done. As I reached the door, I glanced back one last time at the wreckage I had left behind. The wedding had been ruined, but in a strange way, I had regained my power. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine. What Jason had thought he could walk away without facing the consequences. But I had made sure that wouldn't happen. And now, he would know what it felt like to lose everything. The next few days felt like a blur. I tried to keep my distance from everyone, but the weight of what had happened at the wedding kept hanging over me like a dark cloud. The wedding had been shattered, the secrets exposed, and the relationships I once held dear were now broken beyond repair. I couldn't deny the rush of satisfaction I'd felt in that moment, but now, as time passed, the reality of what I had done started to sink in. Jason hadn't reached out to me, and I wasn't surprised. He had no words left. His pride wouldn't allow him to beg for forgiveness, and if he thought I was just going to let him walk away, he was wrong. I wasn't done with him. I had made my point, but there was still so much left to unravel. But it was Sarah who weighed most heavily on my mind. After the wedding, I hadn't heard from her either. I had no idea where she was or what she was thinking, but part of me felt guilty for what had happened. She had been my best friend, the one person I trusted with my heart. And now she was left alone, with nothing but the wreckage of a life she thought she had built with Jason. I had exposed the truth, but it had come at a heavy cost. Her heart, her trust, and, most likely, her friendship with me. I had prepared myself for the fallout, but this felt different. I wasn't just dealing with Jason anymore. I was dealing with the consequences of destroying the bond I once shared with Sarah. Could I ever fix this? Could I ever regain her trust, or was it too late? My phone buzzed, breaking me from my thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" It was Sarah. I felt a lump form in my throat as I stared at the screen. I hadn't expected her to reach out. I thought she would avoid me forever, or worse, hate me for what I had done. But here she was, asking for a conversation. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave things as they were and move on. But I couldn't. I knew this was the moment I had been dreading, the moment when I had to face the reality of what had happened between us. I quickly typed a response. "Where?" she replied almost immediately. "I'm at the cafe on 5th Street. I need to see you." I took a deep breath before gathering my things and heading out. This was going to be harder than I thought, but it was something I had to do. I couldn't just leave it like this. If there was even the slightest chance of repairing our friendship, I owed it to her to try. When I arrived at the cafe, I found Sarah sitting by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee. She looked different. There was a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made me feel guilty for what I had done. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice quiet. "Everything's a mess. My life, my trust in people. It's all fallen apart, and I don't even know who to blame anymore. You? Jason? Me?" I could see the pain in her eyes, the confusion that had settled in since the wedding. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. I had exposed the truth, but now I had to face the fallout of that truth. I had to own up to the damage I had caused. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I never wanted it to be like this. I wanted to make things right, but I didn't think about how it would affect you. I hurt you, Sarah, and for that, I'm truly sorry." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine as if looking for some sign of sincerity. "You're sorry? After everything? After what you did to me?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "You ruined my life. Jason and I were supposed to get married, and now I don't know who to trust anymore." "I know," I replied, feeling the weight of her words. "I've been where you are. I know what it's like to feel betrayed, to feel like the people you trust the most can turn their back on you. But I never wanted you to feel like this. I just I just couldn't let Jason get away with it. Not after everything he put me through. And I thought if I made him feel what I felt, it would make everything better. But I see now that it didn't." Sarah didn't speak for a long time, and I could feel her struggle with the decision in her mind. Finally, she sighed deeply, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can forgive you. What you did, it's unforgivable in a way. But I understand why you did it." I didn't know what to say. The pain in her voice, the anger, the heartbreak, it all hit me like a wave. "I just want things to go back to how they were," I whispered. "I want my best friend back." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, lost in her thoughts. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "Maybe we can fix this," she said. "But it's going to take time, and it's going to take more than just words. You'll have to show me that you can be the person I thought you were." The conversation had taken a toll on both of us. I could feel the weight of Sarah's words lingering in the air, as if the simple acknowledgement that we might be able to fix things somehow made the mess we were in even more complicated. I wanted so badly to believe that we could pick up the pieces of our shattered friendship, but the reality was much harder than I had anticipated. As I sat there, staring at Sarah, I realized that the damage I had caused was more profound than I had imagined. I had thought that exposing the truth, crashing the wedding, and making Jason feel the betrayal I had felt would make everything right. But what I hadn't accounted for was the emotional wreckage left in its wake. Not just for me, but for Sarah too. She had loved Jason, and despite everything that had happened between them, I could see that a part of her still did. Her heart was torn between her loyalty to me and the person she had hoped Jason would be. And that was a pain I couldn't easily fix. Not with apologies. Not with promises. The silence between us stretched on. We were two people trying to find a way back to each other, but neither of us knew how to bridge the gap. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost as if she was speaking to herself more than to me. "You know, Allie, this wasn't just about Jason. It wasn't even about the wedding," she said, her gaze distant. "This was about trust, about the fact that I thought I could count on you. I thought we had each other's backs no matter what. And when you did what you did, it felt like you chose revenge over me. You chose your anger over our friendship." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so consumed by my own hurt, by the need to make Jason pay for what he had done, that I hadn't stopped to consider how Sarah would feel. She had always been there for me, always had my back, and yet I had turned my back on her when it mattered most. "You're paying for it?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You think you're the only one paying for this?" Jason flinched at the harshness in my tone, but he didn't back down. I'm not saying that, but I made a choice, and now I'm dealing with the consequences. I lost you, I lost Sarah, and now I'm losing everything." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. He had finally acknowledged the damage he had caused. For so long, Jason had lived his life with no regard for the consequences of his actions, but now he was facing them head on. "I don't want your apology, Jason," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's too late for that. What you did can't be fixed with a few words. You hurt me. You hurt Sarah. And you need to live with that." He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading. I know, Allie. I know. But I can't lose you as a friend. I can't lose everything I've had. I don't want to keep living with this guilt. I need you to understand that I made a mistake. A huge mistake. And I'm sorry for it. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, but I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. Not yet. Not after everything. He had broken my trust in a way that I wasn't sure could be repaired. I don't know if I can forgive you, Jason, I said quietly, my heart heavy. But I'm not the one you need to apologize to. You need to make things right with Sarah. Jason looked like he had been slapped. I tried, he said, almost defensively, but she won't talk to me. She's hurt, Allie. She's... Then let her be, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air. She's not ready to hear your apology, and you can't force it. You have to let her heal in her own time. The damage is done. You can't fix it with words, but you can show her that you're sorry by letting her have space. Jason sat back, defeated. I could see the battle inside him, the struggle between wanting to fix everything and realizing that some things just couldn't be fixed. Not easily, not quickly. I'll give her space, he said finally, standing up. I just hope that one day she'll find it in her heart to forgive me. I didn't know if Sarah would ever forgive him, but I knew one thing. Jason had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly started to return to a kind of normalcy, though it was far from the normal I had known before. Sarah and I had started to rebuild what was left of our friendship, one small step at a time. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but there was a sense of healing that I hadn't expected. I had to prove to her that I wasn't the person I had been during my quest for revenge. I had to show her that I could be trusted again, and I think, just maybe, I was starting to show her that. But Jason? Jason had vanished from my life completely. After our conversation, he'd given Sarah space, just as I had suggested. But it wasn't enough. The damage had been done. Sarah had moved on, and she hadn't looked back. I think Jason realized that too. The guilt had eaten him alive. And by the time he'd come to terms with everything, Sarah was no longer interested in mending things. She had seen the truth, and while she wasn't ready to forgive, she wasn't willing to drag herself through the pain anymore. I saw him once more, weeks after the wedding debacle, at a local bar. His face was drawn, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked like the shell of the man I once knew, and I could see the same emptiness in his eyes that I had felt for so long. He looked up when he saw me, but he didn't say anything. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. It wasn't awkward. It was just silent. Are you okay? I asked, breaking the stillness. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying to be. I think I've finally realized that I can't fix everything. Not with words, not with apologies, not with anything. There it was, the reality of his situation. The reality that he had lost everything. I don't know what you expected, I said softly, but you've got to live with your choices, Jason. You can't undo the past, and you can't make people forget what you've done. I've learned that the hard way. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I know, I don't know what to do with all of this. Start by making peace with it, I said, and stop trying to fix things that can't be fixed. And with that, I walked away. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet realization that some people will never understand the consequences of their actions until it's too late. Jason had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. As for me, I had made my peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I had learned from my mistakes. I had hurt the people I loved in my pursuit of revenge, and in the end, all it did was leave me feeling emptier than before. But now, I had something that was worth fighting for, my friendship with Sarah. We weren't back to where we were before, but we were slowly getting there. and that was enough for me. We still had a lot of work to do, but I knew that whatever happened, I would never let my anger control me again. Life had a way of teaching lessons, and this was one I'd never forget. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted the most? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more shocking, emotional stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content. You won't want to miss what's coming next.